We're live on YouTube. The ASL interpreter is MIA. A big part of Bayard Rustin Symposium is access, inclusion. So we're just going to try and figure out what's up with that. So the first Bayard Rustin Symposium was at Vallejo Naval Historical Museum in 2018. And yeah, here's some people that were there. We got a certificate for Bayard Rustin from our then mayor, Bob Sampayan. The next year, it got a lot bigger. Mandy Carter came in, and we had her present with our own Brenda Crawford and Lawrence Shine of the Bayard Rustin Coalition. That year we showed the film we're going to show today, the You Don't Have to Ride Jim Crow at the Empress Theater. Robin Washington, who we'll be meeting, flew himself in. And, Mandy Carter, Robin Washington came in on their own expense. People just want this to happen. And my belief is that there's a lot of interest in Bayard Rustin. He means a lot to people. And so we'll get to that. Here's Robin. This is why people come to Vallejo, because they get to, get a lot of attention. Okay, so then we took a year. I took a year. No. Yeah, there was a year off, and then this was the COVID full-on COVID symposium, and there we have Blackberry, who's since passed on. He was a true giant. The first year, we also had QR Hand, who talked about attending the March on Washington. We've just had amazing people come through here, Brenda Crawford, and then we have Pastor Quick. Professor Roxanne Dummett has presented here for a couple of years about Black ASL. Okay, the next year was hybrid. We had Calvin Ellington DeVille do some singing. Bayard Rustin was a singer, so we're always trying to get that in, get the creativity in. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is how Rustin has become known. And so my belief is that nobody should be known for not being known, and that the idea that he has been pushed away from history, that he's little known, is coming from a white perspective, and that the reason Rustin is not better known, speaking as white people, is that we don't know hardly anything about African American history. I believe that Rustin was celebrated, that he was prominent. He was on first name basis with Ted Kennedy. He spent a lot of time in Africa and with the revolutionary leaders there. That was very dear to his heart. And I think he was treated very well there. And my belief is that if it had not been for A. Philip Randolph, Bayard would have stayed in Africa. He loved it there. So it's known that so the gist of the symposium has always been the belief that Bayard Rustin experienced that racism from white progressives affected Rustin's life more than homophobia from anyone. And so he was arrested for a sexual offense in 1952. And that is when he was working for the Fellowship for Reconciliation, which was run by this guy, A.J. Musty. So when Rustin was picked up, A.J. Musty was the head of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. What was said was that Rustin had been telling A.J. Musty that he wouldn't be having relationships or whatever. Bayard was the star of Fellowship of Reconciliation. He was making a lot of money, a lot of success. The question for me is, if he were a white gay man getting picked up, would the Fellowship of Reconciliation have just covered it up? It was real easy back then. He was their star. He was making a lot of money. We know very well there were lots of people getting busted or however. So I think that Musty believed that this was a situation of him policing a black man's sexuality. I have real doubts about whether he would have treated a white man that way. I'm not the only one. He told the entire country, he basically announced what had happened to Rustin. He outed him in front of the entire country, claiming that people would have found out about it anyway. Okay, this is the 50s. There's no social media and stuff. That's not true. So he was fired from Fellowship of Reconciliation. He had worked there for 12 years without severance, and this is his psychiatrist speaking, with Rustin's permission. And when somebody lets their psychiatrist speak, that tells you that they know they didn't really do anything wrong. He knew that. He wasn't really trying to keep this a secret, and he wanted it known how he had been treated. So this was several years before he met Dr. King. Okay, so here's Bill Sutherland. In the 1980s, Bayard and I were in Zimbabwe observing the elections. We had breakfast together one morning. He cried when he remembered how A.J. Musty had abandoned him in 1953. Bayard said he went hungry and would never again allow himself to be in such a situation. And here's Bill Sutherland, and this is a letter that I saw of him writing to Bayard in the 50s. I believe he's speaking about Kwame Nkrumah's inauguration. And there is such care in this letter, such love and solicitousness. So I think we should be looking at the people who stood by Rustin. There were a lot of them, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But so then in the early, and to clarify again, there was no reason for A.J. Musty to let the whole country know what had happened to Bayard. Nobody was threatening them. In the early 60s, Adam Clayton Powell threatened to say that King and Bayard were having an affair. So there was like backbiting and drama and all of that. It's one of the things that I've taken as inspiration from Bayard's life. Because you see, okay, here's the civil rights people. There's the civil rights movement. People had drama with each other. People had issues and stuff, like we do, like I have. And so he tells me that whatever happens, you need to get back in there. You need to keep trying to deal with people. And Bayard continued working with Musty, even after how Musty had treated him. But so some of the reasons another reason that Rustin detached from the South is that was a cultural difference between the North and the South. Some of the Southerners would have had issues with him anyway. So here we have Stan, and so Rustin detaching from King had to do with this specific threat, which Rustin understood. He did that for the good of the movement. He was not fired by Dr. King because he didn't work for him. Musty was a father-type figure, so this was deeply wounding to him, the detachment. But from King, he was like an older brother to King. It did not hurt him the same way. However, a white guy that was running with the civil rights movement was Stanley Levison. Levison actually was a communist. J. Edgar Hoover worked very hard to discredit the civil rights movement by saying people were communists, by accusing Martin Luther King of associating with communists. And so King wasn't. Bayard wasn't. Levinson was. So Levinson could have detached from the movement. He was a real communist. However, he stayed in there funding stuff. Okay, so he cut Bayard off. They've been friends for a long time. He cut Bayard off, and so far as I'm concerned, Levinson, like, sure, people were going to keep Levinson around for his money, but I think he is a great example of allies kind of getting too full of ourselves and thinking that we're indispensable. You know, we're not. He wasn't the strategist. Rustin was the strategist. So Bayard really experienced Levinson's actions as a betrayal. So, you know, I think that Rustin shows us that, to me, he reminds me of myself a lot. But when I started to learn about him, he reminded me of a lot of the LGBT Black friends I had that were talking to me about racism from within their community. And okay, A. Philip Randolph, just one of the great heroes and leaders of the civil rights movement, always stood by Bayard Rustin. Always. He never cut him out. So we need to look at that when we're talking about Rustin being gay. We just showed the care of him that Bill Sutherland showed him, and Randolph. This is a picture I had the fortune to get from Walter Nagel. It hasn't been publicly released. I just love it. You can see the love there. And here's a picture. I mean, to me, this is just such a father-son sort of thing, holding the umbrella over him. So in later years, Rustin spoke about King detaching from him after the threats from Powell. But in 1964, when Strom Thurmond was outed Bayard in Congress, the leaders of the civil rights movement stood up for him. They all did. Okay, there was a lot riding on this. They took a risk, and they stood up for him. So that's what we need to look at, I think, when it comes to Rustin. And here again, when you're looking at his later his later actions, except when I've been attacked, the Black community has seldom seen fit to even mention the gay aspect. When I've been attacked, I've usually been defended by the black community. So the idea that he's not well known because he's gay is, I think, very much put about by white scholars and white filmmakers. And the reason for that is who's getting the grants, who's getting their projects funded. So I'm grateful that this information has been put out there, and I want to thank the people that have researched and gotten the information out here so I could disagree with them. But we're going to be talking today about action, activism, things to do, and a big thing is to try and support scholars, support new work. It is just absolutely brutal for people to get their work funded, and you look at who got grants to do things. The documentary about Polly Murray was made by two white women. So far as I'm concerned, they made it about way too much about her gender. I had been interested in showing this film, but when I saw it more, I was not going to do it because it matters who's telling the story. So that's going to be later. Then you're going to have a white person producing an event with a film made by white people. I couldn't do that. And so the film does have a lot of archival footage, which is great. So one of the things that we are talking about doing is producing it under the auspices of Dr. Lynch or another Black person, so that we can see the film and look at it critically. And so there is, and so I've been interested in the politics of sign language for a long time, and the political rights of people to be included. And so I thought that this would fit well into the symposium. And I've learned more about racism within communities between deaf in disabilities communities. So I've read a lot about the experience of Black deaf people. And so it is a real honor that Mr. Dorsette has come to speak to us, and he'll be doing that again. So there you're looking at language being ripped off. One of the things that happens is, okay, when we see interpreters going viral for rap, it's white interpreters, and they have ripped that off. So we need to try and get to the surface of it. And there's I've learned that it's very important to have Black interpreters at Black events, and I don't know where. I'm incredibly embarrassed, but it's been a learning process, because at one point somebody gave me a real funny look about that, like I'm practicing segregation. I'm like, no, this is important to Black deaf people, so that we had Black interpreters. I'm working on locally trying to get ASL and politics here, but I'm a messenger, and it is just one of the things I've talked about is, how do you fight autism without being honest? How, as allies or whatever, what should be the most important thing is that you're not speaking for anybody. You don't get in front. So I just do my utmost to stress I'm a messenger. Deaf people have requested that this happen. I'm conveying it. I'm not advocating for deaf people. I am advocating for ASL, and I'm advocating for us to understand deaf people, to include deaf people. And so here's a perfect example. Then I'm about to wrap up, and I'm going to be here. I want to leave more of this time for Dr. Lynch and Mr. Dorsette. So I'm going to be here for questions, criticism, whatever. Call me a hypocrite. But so I've been advocating for weeks or months for Vallejo City Council meetings to be ASL interpreted, and I've been talking about the rights of people to understand what's been going on. I've been doing this for weeks and months, and trying to explain no, captions are not acceptable. They're not. But I realized I haven't even been speaking about the rights of deaf people to be understood. And that we have community forums where people can get up and speak their piece, and deaf people have a right to do that too. Everybody has the right to address their communities. So I'm using that as an example of how deep this discrimination goes. I mean, here I am, I'm pretty knowledgeable, and I've been going ahead and being honest myself. And so that is the example. I think that, and so I hope that we can talk about how to be I think supporter is a better term than ally, because I think ally is only if you're both facing the same risk. I happen to think it's more accurate. And that ally assumes that people want you. Not everybody wants allies. You can't make that assumption at all. So I am just very grateful at the people that are here. Mark Lampkin, we've had people that have been involved for years, and Janet, who's doing film. So I think we're gonna this is it. And
Okay, this is legit official. Okay. I just want to say good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here with everybody. This is an honor and a pleasure to just be representing the community. My name is Dr. Kerby Lynch. I'm freshly minted, but you can just call me Kerby too. When we get in front of the politicians and the policymakers, use the doctor because they gotta know we got brains in this thing. So they're not the only ones who can make a decision. But yeah, I just want to first thank Ms. Bergman for inviting me and for hosting such an event like this. I think Bayard Rustin is someone who's super important and who is very complex. He's not perfect. And none of us are perfect. And when we get into social movements and social activism, it's really easy to put someone on a pedestal. But, we always have to remember that only God can judge us ultimately. And that we always have to do things from our integrity. And that's why I love Bayard Rustin, because the good, the bad, the ugly, he was a man of integrity. And I love my ancestors too for all the work that they did with the civil rights movement. Yeah, sure. Okay, this is legit, official. Okay. I just want to say good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here with everybody. This is an honor and a pleasure to just be representing the community. My name is Dr. Kerby Lynch. I'm freshly minted, but you can just call me Kerby too. When we get in front of the politicians and the policymakers, use the doctor because they gotta know we got brains in this thing. So they're not the only ones who can make a decision. But yeah, I just want to first thank Ms. Bergman for inviting me and for hosting such an event like this. I think Bayard Rustin is someone who's super important and who is very complex. He's not perfect. And none of us are perfect. And when we get into social movements and social activism, it's really easy to put someone on a pedestal. But, we always have to remember that only God can judge us ultimately. And that we always have to do things from our integrity. And that's why I love Bayard Rustin, because the good, the bad, the ugly, he was a man of integrity. And I love my ancestors too for all the work that they did with the civil rights movement. I actually just got back from Alabama. I was at the Legacy Museum. I don't know if y'all heard about the Legacy Museum, but in Alabama, an attorney named Bryan Stevenson, he actually created a whole museum about slavery. So it's called From Enslavement to Mass Incarceration. And it's gut-wrenching. It's actually hosted in a slave warehouse where they actually kept enslaved people. So if you're ever in Alabama, it's a super charged space. And it was actually my first time in the South. My family left Vicksburg, Mississippi, came here in 1954 and never looked back. Even my granny on her deathbed was like, do not go back to Mississippi. So me going down south and experiencing that landscape, experiencing what our ancestors really went through, what they suffered through for our freedom, it's very humbling. And I'm very happy to be here in California. But don't get twisted, California is very racist as well. Right? And that's something that Bayard Rustin was really trying to warn us about the future, which is called white liberal syndrome. I don't know, anybody heard of white liberal syndrome? That is a concept Bayard Rustin came up with to warn us about places like California, where everything seems progressive, but they're gonna hit you with that paper and the pen. It may not be the rope around your neck, but it is that paper and the pen on the dotted line, right? And that is, again, why I'm an advocate for reparations, for economic justice, because we are due so many things, right? When we're looking at the way the U.S. government has denied equal opportunity to our people, whether it be through education, whether it be through access to housing, whether it be through the policing system, it's a lot for us to consider what we are really doing. And so really just the nature of my talk is to kind of go through moments of when Bayard Rustin was really trying to warn us about, yeah, we got the Civil Rights Act in 1964, but what's next, right? It's still about political action. It's not about resting, right? And so, yeah. But still, in attitude, I resemble John Legend for the validations and privileges, but oh no, I'm not that white. I'm not that white. I'm not that light. I'm not that animal. I'm not that hypersexual. I'm not that black scum. That's that Angela Davis, my black is beautiful coming out inside of me. But you can't touch me. You can't gentrify. Give your land property values, You can't sweep me to the side and reflect you from hoopty Hondas to Subarus. I'm not racist. I'm not racist, just racially insecure because I've been here before and the vision seems clearer than ever before within myself. How I would rather play with a white Barbie than a black one because I'd be afraid I see an ugly reflection of myself. See, that's the imitation of life in me. Imitation of life, imitation of lies. Like I see why I do what I do. Like I see why I do what I do. Like truth, seek pain. Like this cannot change. Like this cannot change. There is a dysfunction in me. This is a protocol. We are protocols designed. For an example, a Nikki to a Menaji, we want us to be beautiful within our needs. I fiend for white privilege. While there is a generational gap that can be bought at, education is for the white girl and jungle fever is for the sellout. They take our goals and principles and they make us look a mess. And deep down inside myself, there is a dysfunction as burden. When we stand for nothing, we fall for anything. Fall for anything when you stand for nothing. We are new age, modified, designed to not be inclined to curiosity and why systematically things do not work out for you and me. There is a dysfunction in we. I am a robot. I am a robot, and you are too. That's my point. So I wrote that at 16, y'all. And I was a part of Occupy Oakland. Remember that? Occupy Wall Street. You know, we are the 1%. I mean, we are the 99. I wish I was the 1%. I'm just kidding. But no, we are the 99 versus the 1%. And that's really what I was feeling. I was feeling like our mass movement was also not really thinking about what's next. You know, Occupy Oakland was my coming of age where I'm like, okay, there's possibility. But then what happened? That movement kind of came and went. And I actually kind of came up with a lot of social movements. I was very active in Black Lives Matter, another movement that came and went. And so I wrote Robot just wanting us to think that we can't just regurgitate and follow a script, especially a liberal script, a progressive script, or whatever. We really got to think authentically, connect with each other authentically, and really fight. And that's why I say I remember this, I remember that, I remember Black, I remember me, right? Marcus Garvey, Ida B. My ancestors are always telling me, every time I'm in a city council room, they telling me, don't fall for the trap, don't fall for the trap. It's that ancestral awakening. And we all have ancestors, right? It took many different people for us to get to this great nation that we have today. So I just want us to always think about that when we're thinking about Bayard Rustin, the good, the bad, the ugly. He always preached about the one common family, right? We all got the same eyes, same nose, same lips, and all of that, right? But more specifically, I want to get into just some aspects of where I think Bayard Rustin can really apply to the work we're doing today. So he wrote a very controversial text during the Black Power movement. It was called From Protest to Politics, right? And he was really warning that with the Black Power movement, we got to be mindful that the marching is not a substitute for the ballot. And he was actually warning us that the winds of the civil rights movement was actually fighting legal discrimination. That was really the core of the civil rights movement. But he said something about Black power that the protesting may not get at is how do we address economic disadvantage in the Black community? And he was finding that the Black Power movement really wasn't moving in that way. He wanted us to stand together for, again, large-scale intervention, right? He always talked about territorial and scalable change. It's not about the little movement or like the little protest, right? We also heard Martin Luther King talk about the riot is the language of the unheard. And Bayard Rustin, again, would agree with that. But he's like, again, what is the large-scale intervention that we're fighting for? And so that's what I want us to remind ourselves with Bayard Rustin and what he really stood for. Bayard Rustin also understood that absolute power corrupts absolutely. He wanted us to make sure that we had power to make things unworkable for the totalitarians, for the people who didn't really want to hear our voice. And that's something I want us to keep in mind. How do we control our power? How do we use our Black power to make things unworkable for those people? He believed that strategic nonviolence is a strategy because you have to change the nature of the people who naturally feel like they're against us, right? So nonviolence actually was a strategy for us to really relationship build, right? I think today they would call that emotional intelligence. You have to humanize your enemy. That is something that he really felt because he was like, you can actually change the nature of people by connecting with them on a human level. He also believed that the civil rights movement did have limitations. By no means did he think the civil rights movement solved all of the issues. He said at the core, civil rights movement was about the right to vote, public accommodations, and school choice. But he said the civil rights movement did not address the social and economic problems of Black people. He acknowledged that there was still work to do on the economic front, which is why a concept like reparations is important for us to consider. It's not that he was against it, but he's like, how is it really going to address the social and economic problems, right? He believed in full employment for Black people. He believed in quality hospital care. He believed in actually changing the nature of work for Black people. And again, in his essay, Protest to Politics, he didn't see that the Black Power movement was actually demanding those things in a strategic way. Again, like he said, protest is no substitute for the ballot box. He wanted us to stop depending on rhetoric and a few people in Congress to solve our problems. He was really trying to get us to create a new psychological atmosphere to get what we need in this society. And he said that is really what 1954 was all about. That was what Rosa Parks really did with the bus boycott. She made it possible to stand up to the system and say, we are not breaking the law, you are breaking the law, right? And again, that was a psychological shift. And that is something that Bayard Rustin, again, if you read From Protest to Politics, is what he wants us to do right now, is to stand up to the system and be like, we're not breaking the law, you're breaking the law. All right? And I truly believe that, again, he wasn't against the Black Power movement, but he wanted to have some balance, right? He had this really famous quote that said, in the past few years, I've seen all too many Blacks fall into the trap of calling any white person who disagrees with them a racist. And a lot of people would kind of be like, oh, he kind of tripping. But I think, and most importantly, is that we don't want to be reactionary to people, right? As African people, we are the original people of this earth, right? The irony with white supremacy is that it's predicated on us being inferior, but we built the pyramids. We are the masters of original civilization. So when we get into this reactionary back and forth with white folks, then we're not really embracing our true power as the original people of this universe. And so he, again, wanted us to be politically active, to stand up, to not just disengage with white people because that's giving into the white supremacist trap. He wanted us to be thinking about the importance of coalition politics. How do we actually maintain power once we get it? Because it's not about the one moment we have one success, it's about the continuum, right? He believed that political shifts are necessary because the systems of oppression were shifting, right? He talked a lot how we went from class oppression as Black people before 1964 to a moment of racial subordination, right? And now after 1964, Black folks are pretty much subordinate in many different industries and sectors in this country. When we're thinking about education access, we're not seeing a lot of high numbers of Black children receiving quality access, right? And so he wanted us to really think about what is that going to do to us psychologically. A really important concept by the Dr. Joy DeGruy is called post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? And in her book, she talks about cognitive dissonance, that Black people sometimes we act out of our own self-interest and we participate in things that don't make sense to us. And so that is really where Bayard Rustin was trying to warn us about this demand for reparations. He ultimately understood that you can't put a dollar amount on our pain, trauma, and suffering, and so why would you attempt to, right? But I also want to contextualize that as well, because in 1969, the Black Economic Development Coalition, James Foreman, was trying to get $500 million from the Catholic Church, which equated to $5 per Black person at the time. That is specifically what Bayard Rustin was responding to as him being anti-reparations. He considered James Foreman, the leader of that movement at the time, as a hustler and a beggar, right? And that wasn't going to lead to, again, what Bayard Rustin wanted, which was large-scale intervention. And so when people say that he's anti-affirmative action, anti-reparations, anti-Black studies, again, what he was talking about, they're going to give us these little crumbs and these little programs, but that's not going to lead to scalable long-term change. What Bayard Rustin wanted was federal jobs guarantee, higher minimum wage, universal health care. These were all concepts he was talking about in the 1960s before pretty much anybody. And look how long it's taken us to get those concepts today. And so he talked a lot about how do we just use every opportunity for political action. You have to move things into action. You can't just wait on anybody getting you anything. And it reminds me of James Brown. He had that quote, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open up the door and I get it myself. That is the mentality of the 1960s that I love so much and that I appreciate my ancestors for. But again, not to be cynical or, just act like they're super perfect. Yes, they said, Bayard Rustin said he didn't support reparations, but I think if he knew a little bit more about what has happened over the past 50 years, he would be disappointed. He would be disappointed in how the U.S. government has tried to strategically deny us equal access to opportunity. I think Bayard Rustin would actually be interested in reparations today as a method for addressing and repairing the harm into the Black community. I think he'd be interested to know how the mass incarceration system has systemically and strategically targeted young Black men to put them into the prison system, making 7 cents an hour, particularly here in the state of California, which is a modern day form of slavery. I think he would be interested in knowing about this brutality and strategically how Black communities who have been divested from red line are being protecting us by people who are supposed to be protecting us. I think he would be interested in gentrification and how we do need justice for that, how we do need justice for the 2008 market crash where Black people were systematically targeted for interest rates that went through the roof and no longer could afford their homes and their communities are now absent. I think Bayard Rustin would be interested in reparations today if he knew about the premature death and how Black people live up to 12 years less than a white person. And so that's why I think we should all just appreciate Bayard Rustin for who he was in the 1960s and not judge him so harshly. And then just really recognize the power that he was trying to get in us to be politically organized and to be active. But again, we can't just idolize, the civil rights movement. We have to have our own movement, Frantz Fanon said every generation has a duty. You either betray it or you fulfill it. And so the duty of this generation is to, again, address mass incarceration, address gentrification, address the fact that our children don't have equal education. And so what's going to be our civil rights movement, and really what I promote is that it's reparations, right? That we do need to remind people about, even after 1964, the racism just reinvented itself, right? And that is what he was warning us about with white liberal syndrome, is that people going to be in your face acting like they support you, but they're not going to put grocery stores in your community. They're going to put you next to a refinery. They're going to not have equal sentencing in our criminal justice system. And so really excited, just to get into a conversation with y'all about the impacts of the Jim Crow South, because in my opinion, we're kind of living in some Jim Crow type of environment here in California, and it's just not being addressed or talked about in that way. And so the words of Bayard Rustin is super important. I'm someone who did study Black studies at UC Berkeley, and I didn't learn anything about how to bring solutions to the Black community, right? And so there's a lot of things that distract Black people and don't give them a real pathway to real political autonomy. And we need to address what's the real point of that. And yeah, freedom ain't free, y'all. So I'm really excited to just be here with y'all, engage y'all. Those are pretty much my comments about Bayard Rustin and what he means to me. But yeah, I love y'all. Thanks for listening to me. I love him, love y'all. And let's just keep fighting, you know? Peace. Black power.
Dr. Kerby Lynch. Dr. Kerby Lynch, the star. Okay, and we just have really exciting people here. The next presenter is Teddy Dorsette III. And Teddy was raised in Detroit. His first exposure to the arts and filmmaking happened at home. Teddy has you can check out his films on YouTube, and his company is a deaf-led streaming company. I've been working on getting the streaming, signing, and everything going for a couple years. Has not always been smooth, and so I just keep at it. Teddy is the spokesperson for National Black Deaf Advocates, and kind of what happens with me in the symposium is that it just takes time to build relationships. And so I was corresponding with this organization for a while, and they gradually decide to get involved. And that's just very much what happens with the symposium. And it's just exciting because it's just grown and grown.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon,
We're
everyone.
all here together.
Yay, we're all here together.
I'm happy to be here today.
I'm happy to be here today.
I hope you're keeping yourself
I hope
warm.
you're keeping yourselves warm.
You probably already know my name. I'm Teddy.
You probably already know my name. I'm Teddy Dorsette III.
I'm a spokesperson for
I'm
National
a
Black Deaf Advocates.
spokesperson for National Black Deaf Advocates.
And I'm public director of
public
ethnic discussion. I'm sorry, the interpreter.
The interpreter's having difficulty.
Director of public engagement. So the topic I want to discuss is me being here and presenting for
Rustin Bayard and what's been going
Really,
on.
I'm honored to be here.
Really, I'm honored to be
what I've
here
noticed
because what I've
and that has
noticed
been brought up is
and that has
Rustin
been brought
Bayard.
up is Rustin Bayard.
The problems that have occurred
since his struggle, his fight in the 1960s,
that were involved a long time ago.
At that time.
It was people of color.
It was people of color
Different backgrounds.
with different backgrounds,
complexions.
different complexions,
Different kinds of work.
did different kinds of work,
And what they could see through the discussions
and what they
of
could
that
see through the
time,
discussions of that
and
time,
through their experience. And, what
and
they've
through their
gone through.
experience and what they've gone through.
So the topic of the
The
National Black Deaf
topic of the National Black Deaf Advocates is to give support to our community, to fight for their rights,
and to support our community. So I am hoping that
our community can continue to work with and be supported by uplifting
people in finding jobs and sustaining them. And the point of me being here today in this discussion is to also explain about the work
that he's done and what we remember
from what we
and understood from what we have learned
continue to partner
and
with
continue to
others.
partner with others.
And the fight for
equality
and
our rights within our community and outside our community.
And when I share the story,
and my experience,
no matter how small it is,
no
it really
matter how
makes a big impact.
small it is, it really makes a big impact.
So our organization of National Black Deaf Advocates,
we plan to take
have a conference
this year
in Belgium.
in Belgium,
Excuse me, in Birmingham,
Alabama.
And that is a local.
And that area is known for its history of Black people's struggle and their fight for their rights,
and how it really inspired
people to stand up
and take control
and also present our
within our
history
community,
within our community, and to also learn
give hope to how we can
continue to partner and share
our life lived experience with our community, and make
our
sure
life
that our
lived
future
experience with our
and our
community,
future
and make sure that our future is and our future generations
and all will understand our history and understand the system.
and
that
all
we've been,
will understand our
operating
history
under. So the point of the
and understand the
organization
system that we've been operating
Black deaf
under. So the
person.
point of the organization is,
I love history.
I'm a Black deaf person,
and it has helped me understand
I love
where
history.
I come from and where
and
I'm
it has
going,
helped me understand where I come
and what my
from
future will look
and
like.
where I'm going and what
to
my future
understand
will look like.
also, keeping that in mind, my future of
And
where
to
I
understand
come from.
also, keeping that in mind, my future of where I've come
also
from.
continue to bring
And how the
that history,
community
the
can also
information
continue
to the
to
future
bring that
generations.
history and the
we can do that through
information
conferences that
to the
we will
future
tend to hold
generations.
every
And we
2
can do
years.
that through conferences that we will tend to
And
hold
when I
every 2
mention
years.
this, that we're going to have a discussion,
And when I
and
mention
share our
this, that we're going to have a
experiences and
discussion
information,
and share our experiences and information,
we need to also at the same time remember how
we need to
continue
also at
forward.
the same time remember how we continue forward.
And I hope that we can all together
And I hope that we
remember
can all together
and
remember
the work
Bayard
that he's
Rustin
done
and the work that he's done
uplift the community
to uplift the
with
community
his stories, and I hope the stories that we share will
with
help
his
push
stories, and I hope the stories that we share will help push for equality
for all people,
and the rights
especially
for all people,
disabled
especially
people of color,
disabled people, people of color,
gender, the whole
gender,
span,
the whole
and that we
span,
recognize by how we,
and that we recognize by how we
how we
talk,
converse with each other,
how we
and
converse
we
with
bring
each
this
other,
information
and how we
forward,
bring this
that we will
information
also
forward, that we will
inform
also
those,
inform those in the future.
So I want to also thank all of
So I
you
want to
for
also
coming
thank
and being
all of
willing to
you
listen
for
in
coming and being willing to listen and learn,
and being a good arbiter
and
of
being
this
a good
information
arbiter of this
to make sure
information
that
and bringing
we
it
can
forward, to
continue
make sure that we can continue to
bring that information
and
community,
uplift the community,
to make sure that we have equal
to make
rights
sure that we
and
have equal rights and that we
equality.
equality.
Thank you.
And
One of the things that
just one of the things that I would say, like, very much connected to with what Teddy is saying is that ASL access and equal rights, it's just something we have to try and hang together to do. And it's what I found. I would love to have all my events ASL interpreted. I can't do that, but I've raised money to get this one interpreted mostly. But yeah, I mean, again, we need to people, please donate if you can. And and I found, I mean, there's people that will donate specifically for ASL interpretation. So it's about building awareness. And one of the things I remember before, there were lifts on buses, and eventually that got to happen, and we're used to them now. When laws were passed to mandate with the American Disabilities Act, ramps and handrails and elevators, people fought it. They didn't want to spend the money. And the disabilities community just kept at it. I really recommend the film Crip Camp, which is about the demonstrations and all that. I mean, people literally did put their lives on the line. So my hope with getting awareness out there more is that when more people learn about the importance of ASL interpretation, there we can try and get more grants, and we just need to push. And at one point, I was working with the Solano Community College ASL interpretation program. We need to support careers in ASL interpretation, the programs, and we need to not ask interpreters to work for free. And you know, the mayor of our town here brought up trying to have interpreters work for free for the city. Anybody that's not, and if you're not familiar with Vallejo, anybody listening, I mean, Vallejo's paid out millions in lawsuits to people. Like, okay, you can afford ASL, but unfortunately for him, when I brought the petition to some of the deaf community members and that were signing and that have made the formal request for ASL interpretation. When people found out the mayor of our town wanted interpreters to volunteer, like 10 more people signed it. So I was like, too bad. You should have been more careful. But no, and then a lot of interpreters are independent contractors. And so as a matter of workers' rights, we need to look out for them. And I believe that interpreters also run a risk of repetitive stress injury. And again, we've had white interpreters barging in on areas where communities want Black interpreters. So yeah, there's a whole lot of issues with that. And yeah, so does, Dr. Kerby, Teddy, does anybody have any comments, or we can take a break, go into the film? Yeah, I think, okay.
Oh, I have
Yes.
a question, Dr. Kerby.
Yeah.
So is there an organization in this area that is working on reparations?
Yeah, so.
Oh, Kerby, can you do here, please? Oh.
I'm coming back to the community. I just graduated from Berkeley. I've been living out there. So last year was my first year coming back in. So the short answer is like no, but the goal is to bring all of our organizations together. I know I'm personally a part of Black Women Organizing Political Action in the House, or was in the House, NAACP. I'm personally a part of it through them. So the goal is to keep having events. You can follow us on Facebook, Operation Reparations 707. And just be looking out for the town halls, because the goal is to introduce a resolution for a reparations advisory committee like other cities have, to start exploring these issues, getting the city to commit to a reparations program in this city, because it's due. And so that's kind of the future action. Mr. Scari behind you is having a Black History event on February 25th, 6 to 8 p.m., where I'll be speaking more specifically about what I believe Vallejo reparations looks like. But it's a real grassroots movement, and it's really everyone's movement to get involved in. So definitely going to be calling on y'all, people like Ms. Bergman, to spread the word. But it's really our movement, and anybody can get involved, and everybody do your own thing to advance it. I'm personally part of Black Women Organizing Political Action, Solano NAPA chapter. If you want to join, shout out to me, and then we'll get that conversation started.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have comments, questions? One of the things, I know that National Black Deaf Advocates is working on setting up a set archive. So yeah, it's about people trying to tell their own stories, and just like, you know, get the history. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people alive that still knew Rustin, and another reason, let me just, while I'm on here, a big thing that Bayard Rustin did was trainings and teaching people about nonviolence and education. So there's a whole lot of people that he changed a lot of lives, but that's not the stuff that winds up in history books. Coretta Scott King was in a workshop with Bayard when she was 13 years old. It's so cool. It's just so cool. And yeah, so a lot of his contacts with people were personal, and he was asked to write a memoir in the 1950s. I mean, he was celebrated. He was known, and if I don't know something, that doesn't mean other people don't. So that's just one of the lessons of history, I think. So, okay, we are going to take a minute to take a break and put up a film, and then we're going to have Robin Washington. Dr. Lynch mentioned NAACP, and NAACP Vallejo has supported me. I just find it, a deep honor to have their logo on my flyers, knowing the history of the NAACP, what it means. It's a responsibility, and I do feel needing to measure up along with Solano AIDS Coalition. There's so much support here, but I want to acknowledge Mr. Jimmy Jackson, who was the president of the local NAACP, just a real kind man. And, when I first started going to NAACP, I had written asking to be placed on the agenda, and I was like, who is this lady? And then, after a while, I was like, okay, I think I've kind of grown on them. And I wound up be the sort of person that just shows up to events. But again, the NAACP is very active, and there's a lot of different ways to go about social change, and people always are food and really put down by people. And he just told me that you need to keep going. You need to look at the bigger picture. So, if you want to hang tight a minute, we're going to set up the film. Thank you so much.
You.
Okay, we can hear you. Okay, yeah. Okay, what was
For doing the whole documentary?
Yes.
That's a long answer.
Robin, you're good at long
Right, but we don't have 3 hours. So I grew up in the civil rights movement, as my mother was an officer of the Congress of Racial Equality and the NAACP in Chicago. And we had meetings of those organizations and others in our living room when I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And I was taken on marches and protests and sit-ins. I remember distinctly a sit-in at the Chicago Board of Education in 1963 that lasted a week. And this, for me, was my normal upbringing. And so I was, quite familiar with the movement. Later on, I grew up, I became a journalist, And I thought I might pursue justice in the world by chronicling the world with an eye toward justice. And a very long story short, I stumbled upon this history that I did not know. And I certainly knew about the Freedom Rise of '61. I certainly knew about CORE and the NAACP. But I did not know the origins of CORE, and I did not know of the journey. And I was working at a group, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, of which I believe you have some members there, which is a pacifist organization from which CORE started, as was said in the film. And I happened to be working there as their communications director in 1992, which was the 50th anniversary of the founding of CORE. And Jim Farmer was still with us. And I wanted to talk to him as the founder of CORE. And I certainly knew about him, although I had never met him. And that began the history. And we also had, at the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a lot of oral history that wasn't quite complete, that was said in our headquarters building. And things like, we started CORE, and we ran the first Freedom Ride. So I was wondering what these people were talking about, and I found records about the journey, the Freedom Ride, and then one by one found the survivors of that trip, and the rest you know. So of course I had to do this. This was part of my history as well as the world's, and it was also my mission as a journalist to bring an unknown aspect of the movement to the world. And I'll add to that this was a race against time, because when I started working on it in 1992, there were 10 of the 16 riders still alive that we had located. And by the time we started shooting in 1993, there were 7 alive. So that answers the questions, by the way, what year it was done. It was completed in 1995. What do I do now? Too much. So I should say, as I said, I became a journalist. I'm from, as I said, Chicago, and really started working as a journalist in Chicago, writing for some small papers. But in Minnesota, where I ran a small town weekly paper when I was 29 years old, I had an engineering magazine that I started at the same time. Then I went to Boston, and I was very fortunate to have a fellowship at WGBH TV and radio. And that, of course, is the major PBS station in the country. And the fellowship was to teach science journalists. I had, again, that engineering magazine that qualified me as a science journalist. It was to teach us how to do broadcasts, with the idea that we would do shows like Nova, and some of my fellows ended up indeed working for Nova. And that was a wonderful place to learn both TV and radio. And so I stayed at WGBH. I produced my first documentary called Vermont, the Whitest State in the Union, because once I got out to New England, I discovered that. But Vermont has a rich Black history. Actually, today, Maine is whiter than Vermont, but Vermont still has a rich Black history, even though there aren't very many Black people there. And worked on various shows. And then again, as I said, stumbled upon this history when I went to work at the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Then I worked later on as the editor of the Bay State Banner, the African American weekly paper in Boston, the Boston Herald, which was the tabloid competitor to the Boston Globe, where I covered many things, particularly transportation and the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. Then I came back to Minnesota, in Duluth, Minnesota, which is where I'm talking to you from now. And I became the editor, the top editor of the daily paper, the Duluth News Tribune. After 10 years, I left that and actually sort of returned to Boston, writing for the Boston Globe, but going back and forth between Minnesota and Duluth and WGBH again. And today I am the editor at large of the Jewish Forward, which is the old Yiddish daily forward. We're still in Yiddish and we're in English. We're not in print, we're online these days. And I have a show on Wisconsin Public Radio. And I also supervise 10 wonderful interns every year for American City Business Journals. And that's 3 half-time jobs, which is not the direction you want to go when you are trying to retire.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of hard to picture you retiring. Do you
Right.
think you will come back to Vallejo?
Oh, I'm sure I will. You know, one thing in my life that is, how do you put it? There are no nevers, I think. As I just said, I started in Chicago, went to Minnesota, then went to Boston. Then what did I do? I came back to Minnesota. Then what did I do? I went back to Boston, and I visit Chicago whenever I can. It's almost like those dreams that you're back in high school, and suddenly you're in class and all. And I really have had those experiences, and they're great actually. So, yep. I'll be back there. I can't tell you when or why, but I will be.
Good. Well, I just am always so grateful if you're here, in person or online. People are just always so eager and generous to share their perspectives on this. And so, yeah, thank you very much.
You're quite
Anybody got
welcome.
anything? Okay. Cool. See you next time, Robin.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And okay, again, there should be recording of Kerby presentation. Paula Bauer, the best. Yeah. Oh, Bob. Yes, yeah. Thank you so much.